I recorded this clip for release earlier in the day, but unfortunately, once I was editing it, I discovered that there was just far too much wind noise as I recorded it on the way to work. So you're going to have, you know, a redone version. I was able to save the end of the clip, so we're going to cut to that later. All right, so I want to tell you a story. It's story time. Long, long ago, in the early 90s, I had the opportunity to play in a great Game Masters campaign. It was a Shadowrun campaign, second edition in those days. And he had altered the setting a bit so that basically the characters we were playing were like a knightly kind of mythic version of Interpol. Imagine that after the magic returns to the world, and to use a vulgar term, goblinization begins, that society falls in Europe. And he posited that there were, wide-scale economic collapses, and that there were small enclaves of technology, but basically across Europe, people had been reduced down to subsistence farming and had gone back almost to like a Middle Ages. And the characters that we were playing were a knightly order tasked with taking care of threats, whatever they might be. And we were under an awful lot of restrictions, no cyberware and whatnot. So what made all of this really interesting was there were so many secrets. So many secrets. There are secrets between characters. There are secrets between generations of these knights. And every mystery that we solved led to another layer of the onion. And sometimes we weren't even sure if we were digging into the same onion. I mean, it was really, really engaging. Physically challenging for the characters, mentally engaging for the players. What also made this game special was that it was emotionally engaging. And what this story is really about is listening. And I don't mean listening to the Game Master. I don't mean listening to details. I don't mean listening to what the Game Master might be implying. I mean listening to the other players, and really listening to the other players and interacting and acting upon all the little messages that they're sending. So this game was a generational game, and I mean that in the normal sense, in that there were generations of these knights, and players were drawn from different generations, or the game was run in different eras. But I mean this in an unusual sense, in that there were generations of players. And when I joined, I think I was in the third or fourth wave of new intake into this campaign. There were no original players left. And each successive player to join was exposed to things that the newer players hadn't experienced, which added to the mystery. And of course, every time a new player would join, they would also experience this, which would add to our sense of mystery. What new intrigues is this new player bringing, or is this really an old player come back? So the way that worked was that around the table, if you lost a character to violence or to insanity, because we were also using a sanity mechanic, or if you lost the character to too much sanity, then your place at the table was given to someone else for a while. And you couldn't come back until there was a vacancy. So the group of guys that I was playing with were very, very careful to create a very strong image of their character. So there were no weak links around the table. You had a very, very reinforced sense of who the character was. You could see them. You could see the character. Body language, mannerisms, vocabulary changes, the way that they were portrayed as thinkers, the attitudes. I mean, just everything. Once game started, you could really sense them. How did this happen? It was this emotional level. The characters and the players were totally engaged with one another. So one of the first sessions that I played with them, we literally sat around the campfire and shared histories. In an early game that we played, we ended up having to chase a spy, an espionage agent, through these maze-like corridors. And the Game Master separated us physically in space. And one of the players was playing a slightly older generation of character. And he was slightly older than us. And he took great pains to establish what it would be like for this once fit, knightly character to be on, or to be experiencing, the natural onset of aging. So he would complain about being slower than us, or being finding it difficult to keep up, or finding it difficult to get his expanding midriff into his armor, and not spotlight hogging, not diverting attention to his special snowflake character, but instead establishing his corner of our shared narrative. And the story I want to relate is, we're chasing this spy down through these maze-like corridors, and we're being separated by our own movement rates, or being separated by taking side turnings and trying to get ahead of the spy, or trying to prevent the spy from ditching us, because we've got to catch this guy. And so the Game Master is separating us in the room, and it's brilliant.
So the Game Master has us physically separated in a space in the room, so that we feel this increasing sense of distance as the faster characters pull away and the slower characters are falling behind, and people in the middle, and we have to be shouting to each other instructions, like if we've seen hints that the spy has passed this way, and that sort of thing. And so we're now all spread out. We got the most gung-ho character way out front, and me and two other guys are in the middle somewhere, and of course the character playing the player playing the older character, he's far behind, and he's shouting instructions and we're shouting instructions and that sort of thing. And the guy in the front is yelling, "I see him, I see him, I see him." And a dear friend of mine, he's sitting right next to me. He's the closest to the older character, who's also talking. And instead of just going with the player knowledge, instead of just hearing what he says and moving the plot forward, he yells at the lead character, "Hang on a minute. I can't hear you over the wheezing of the old man." And I love this. And this is just one example of how things went, because at no point did the player said that his character was wheezing, but he was pantomiming. He was describing the physical difficulty of a once fit man as he's encountering the onset of natural aging. And the player took all of these verbal and nonverbal cues and transformed it into something that of course would be there. He pulled out the fact that the heavy breathing in armor as we're running down these stone corridors might actually make it hard to hear. Now, it was played partially for laughs, but it was also played to give credit, to validate the character creation of our fellow player. Everything he'd been trying to communicate was summed up in some way by him in his own personal narration, his own imagination of the scene, including these little details which have absolutely no value, let's say, to solving the mystery or catching the escaping spy or anything. It's just a part of the background dressing, and in fact it's a part of the background dressing in the imagination of one of the players. It's not relevant to the scene being set by the Game Master, but it meant the difference between this being a real and vital and tangible experience for all of us and it not being one.